Hello, and welcome back to the Astroimaging channel. Tonight's session is an open discussion session, and we do these semi-frequently. And basically, what it is I will list a few topics that have come up in the past week, or I will reach out to you guys for topics to bring up and things that you may just want to speak about today or hear a little bit about, and we'll use the collective wisdom of the people in the room to answer those questions. Before I do that, though, a bunch of things are popping into my head. Before I do that, though, I'm going to quickly switch over my screen and show off this week's image of the week, which goes to Arturas Medvedevas for his NGC 4565. And this is a great image. What really stood out to me is the color in this. As always, you can go onto our website and check it out, get a closer look, see it in high resolution. And our website's also a good spot to go to submit your images, but also just see what people are submitting. You know, if you're searching for an idea, something to shoot for the night, typically people are posting these images in season. And hey, if you wanted to hit this target, it's probably a good time. And as well, if you go onto our website, you can comment on these images. You can post your own images and hope to get chosen for the image of the week. Or you can just look around our website and enjoy it. Okay, that is covered. What I am going to do now is I am going to take back my screen if I can find it. There we go. Okay. So where do I want to start here? First things first, as we're going through, if any questions pop into your heads that you want to ask, type them right into our chat. What's chat, you ask? Well, we do not monitor the YouTube chat. The chat that we monitor is the chat that's on our website, theastroimagingchannel.com. If you go to our website, you'll see a little bouncing thing in the bottom right. Click that, and you're going to see it. You're also going to see this session start right up. So you'll be able to watch the video and chat all at the same time. The chat does pop off. If you click one of the icons in the bottom, you can pop it off, and you can open the session in a separate window and really just have a nice console going on so you can get in the conversation and keep it going. Before I had seen, and we get this question somewhat frequently, how do I get into this room that so that you could talk with us? And typically we reserve it for people who are going to who have contributed or who are going to be useful in the discussion that we're coming up upon. That said, something did pop into my head just over the last I don't know, 5-10 minutes, and maybe what we'll do is one of these sessions we'll invite a bunch of beginners in. And those beginners can ask beginner questions, and we'll still maintain the room, I'd say half and half. So some people who can answer the beginner questions and some people who can ask the beginner questions, and we'll just kind of cover that. We do try and mix up the sessions so that we cover some advanced topics and some beginner topics. And I'll tell you, as much as I like doing the advanced topics because a lot of the more experienced people learn from it, I like the beginner topics because that's what we do to get people interested in astrophotography. And getting people interested is basically our version of outreach, and that's kind of where this whole concept of the Astroimaging channel came from. Okay, so that said, the first few topics, and I see Mars is in the room, and she's one of the people that had asked me these in the comments thread of another I believe it was last week's session. A couple of these questions. But the first one I'm going to start with is exposure time. How do you determine the individual sub-exposure time? And so I can back up, and let me back up for the beginners. When we are taking our images, when we are posting our images on Astrobin or showing off our pretty pictures, basically what you're seeing is very long exposures. In some cases, they are 8 hours. In some cases, some of the guys in the room are doing 40 hours. But you'll quickly say, well, how do you take a 40-hour exposure? I mean, it gets light out, and then it gets dark, and it gets cloudy, and then it gets light out, and then it gets dark. And how do you do that? So basically, we end up combining our images. We'll sometimes refer to it as stacking. And okay, in theory, oh yeah, that makes sense. That sounds great. But then you sit down at your telescope with your camera, and the first thing that pops into your head, well, how long should my first exposure be? And there's a few rules that we follow for this. And with whether you're shooting with the DSLR or a CCD, the rules are somewhat similar, but you kind of find that optimal exposure in a different way. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to start with the DSLR. And I know I'm going to be toggling between a whole heck of a lot of screens today, so hopefully this all works out well. If you're not seeing what it sounds like I'm talking about on my screen, let me know. But I'm sharing my screen right now. And oops, that's not even what I wanted. Where am I going? Right here. And I'm going to make this full screen, and I am not going to see you right now. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make it bigger, but not full screen, so I can still see the comments. What I have here, and I believe you can see it. Let me make sure. Yes, so I clicked the wrong window. Like I said, I have a lot of windows up. It's going to get a little confusing on my end. So basically what I have here is an individual sub-exposure, and this is, I am remote viewing into my laptop that's out in my observatory, and this is a sub-exposure that I took the other night. I'll say the other night. It feels like it's been a long time. It's been raining here for forever. But I took this with my CCD. The difference between using a CCD and a DSLR is a CCD gives you more of a numerical value, or can give you a more accurate numerical value than a DSLR can. So what I'm going to do is I am going to pretend for a moment that I've shot this with a DSLR, and I'm going to click over to this histogram right here. And you'll notice I'm going to circle this area with my mouse, and on the top here is basically what you know of a histogram, a graphical representation of the number of pixels and their brightness levels. So these are all of the pixels represented in a graph. That spike right there are basically the lit up pixels, the pixels that have received photons and converted them to electrons. So for a DSLR, basically what you want to do is you want to make sure that that spike on the histogram is separated from the left side. You want a bit of blank area between the left side and the beginning, or the foot right there, of the spike. What that does is it means that the signal in the image is separated away from the read noise. If this were a shorter exposure, this spike would be further to the left. If this was a much, much longer exposure, this histogram could work its way all the way over to the right. A normal photograph, one that's not of the sky, the histogram may look like this one on the bottom here. In fact, the histogram on the bottom here is a temporarily stretched version of this image. What do I mean by that? Well, these are still linear, so if I were to unstretch this image, that's what it really looks like. Actually, no, I got that wrong. Yeah, you're not going to see any difference, but that's what it really looks like. So this is an unstretched image, and basically the histogram on the bottom should look the same as the histogram on the top. But that doesn't do me any good, because while I'm shooting, I want to know what it is I've captured. So this program actually stretches it temporarily for me and just shows me what's in that image. So again, for a DSLR, the histogram may be your best, the best reading you're going to get on how long should I expose. And like I said, just get that spike separated from the left. And once it's separated, that is about as long of an exposure as you need. When you figure out what that is, let's say this is 3 minutes, then what you're going to do is you're going to set up your program to shoot lots and lots of those 3-minute exposures. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you what happens with a CCD. With a CCD, rather than just paying attention to that histogram, we get numerical values of the pixels. So you can see here the mean and the median, which for argument's sake are going to be very, very close, and you can basically look at either one of those and get a good idea. And this is basically across the whole image. My mouse cursor ends up being a sampling point, and I can position my mouse cursor on here, and I see this. I'm going to move this out of the way. Oh, there we go. So my mouse cursor, I can put it over, say, a portion of dark sky right there, and it's going to give me a 21 by 21 sampling of that region. And if you look at the bottom, sampling 21 by 21, you'll see mean, median. Like I said, very close. Minimum, maximum. If I go to a star, you're going to see that maximum jump right up. Look at that. The maximum is basically the max the exposure can be, so I can tell that star is saturated. But the key is you want to separate the background sky from the read noise. And when you do that, you become what we call sky limited. When you're shooting RGB exposures, your aim is to get sky limited. You may be light pollution limited, but light pollution limited and sky limited are, for argument's sake, the same thing. It's much better to be sky limited than light pollution limited, but the light pollution is in the sky. This program doesn't know the difference between light pollution and sky. So basically, whether it's a histogram or an ADU count, they're going to be, that's the one thing you're going to be looking at, what that background is. So you have to know a few things about your CCD. And let me see, should I answer that question first, or should I go into this? No, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick to the plan, and I'm going to show you one way. Now, yes, I already saw the question pop up. Ideal exposure time, and I'm NA'd, and I'm not sure why it says NA. In some cases, well, first of all, Sequence Generator Pro wants to know the gain of your camera, it wants to know the read noise spec, and it wants to know your dark current spec, and it already knows the temperature of your exposure, the temperature of the sensor during the exposure. I do have all those plugged in, so I'm not sure why my ideal exposure time is blank there. But in some cases, for you, it may not say NA. It might actually try and read into it what that exposure time should be. But I'm going to jump over to a different website, and there's actually a few of them. There's a simple one, and I believe now you're seeing the Starzona website, their ideal exposure calculator. And this is a basic exposure calculator that makes a few assumptions, more assumptions than the next one I'm going to show you. But I do believe that this is, in most circumstances, good enough. Now, yes, we're techie geeks who really want to know everything about everything. So for some people, you want to dig deeper into it, or you want to know exactly what's going on in the background. But I'm going to show you basically how simple this is. Basically, you can pick your camera. If your camera is not listed here, the important thing is to pick the sensor. So I have an SBIG STF 8300, but my camera isn't listed here. Oh, yes, it is. Well, I shouldn't say that. ST8300, it is listed here. The ST and the STF, for argument's sake, are going to be the same camera. So enter your test exposure in minutes. So this exposure that I had taken earlier, I'm going to jump back there and see. Oops, wrong one. 5-minute exposures. So that was a 5-minute exposure. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to just type in 5 minutes. Enter measured background value. So I'm going to jump over to here, and I am going to hover my cursor over the background, and now I'm going to give you a big qualifier. So you can see my background, 25, 25, 25, 25. We're gonna use that figure for argument's sake. But, and here's the big but, most cameras, well, I should say all cameras are going to introduce a bias pedestal. That bias pedestal prevents your camera from, during calibration, recording negative values. It's really important in the way that our calibration works that it has that pedestal built in, and that pedestal is significant enough to not cause negative values. And I happen to know that my pedestal is 1,000 ADUs. So I have to subtract 1,000 from that 2525. And I'm going to go over to here, and I'm going to say 1525, which is 2525 minus 1,000. The basic rule of thumb is that you want your read noise to only have a 5% contribution. And when I click calculate, I'm going to get 8 minutes. Okay, so what that tells me is the optimal exposure would have been 8 minutes. I was shooting 5 minutes, and that was actually my run. But I shot that during the new moon, and as the moon comes out, as the moon becomes more of a factor, it's going to push this figure up because it's going to brighten the background. And through the course of this particular image, that might go as high as 2,500. So if I just plug in that 2,500 figure into there, I'm going to click that, and you're going to see 4.75. So basically what I tried to do is I tried to average that out and also make it a good, a nice round number. 5 minutes is where I came up to, so that's why I'm tending to shoot my RGBs at about 5 minutes. So that is basic, that's the simple calculator. There is a more advanced calculator, and this is and I'm sorry, that first one is on Starzona. This one's on CCDware. And if you Google CCDware, CCD exposure calculator, you'll come up with this. And I believe this this is the one that does not have the SBIG STF 8300. It does have the CAF sensor though, and my CCD has the CAF sensor. But if I pick the CAF sensor, it doesn't know everything about the camera that the CAF sensor's in. It does know the specified read noise of the sensor, which should be the same no matter which body they put it in, or no matter what temperature it's at. There are some differences. Some body manufacturers are good at limiting the read noise, but it's 10%, 15%, not much more than that. So I'm going to leave that read noise at 8. The gain. Now my sensor's my CCD gain is set at 0.39. You can look this up on your spec table of your camera. You can also, I'm going to show you in a little bit another way to determine these figures of your actual camera, your specific camera. You don't have to read the spec sheet. You can look at you can take a few separate exposures, plug them into a particular wizard, and it will tell you the exact figures. So you could know if your camera is performing a little bit better than spec, a little bit worse than spec, or however it may be. Dark signal. So the dark signal in electrons per second, I happen to know that for my camera it's spec'd at 0.2 electrons per second. And the temperature of the dark signal, what I'm going to do is I am going to plug in my figure of what my temperature that I was shooting at in Celsius, which is minus 20 degrees. I haven't looked into the doubling temperature, but I do believe that dark signal is a factor of temperature, and I believe no matter which sensor you're using, the factor of the doubling of dark signal is pretty close. I don't think it changes much even between sensors. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to go back to the sky background. Remember, I'm plugging in this 1525 figure for my 5-minute exposures. And I'm going to come back down here, and I'm going to let read noise be 5% of the sky background noise. And when I click update, 5.6 minutes. So you can see only a slight difference. You know, the difference between 5.6 minutes and 8 minutes it isn't that much. And when it comes to your actual image run, this is just as accurate as we're getting with these figures. This is just a rule of thumb. In reality, you should, in a perfect world, you should do this with your R filter, your G filter, and your B filter. In the real world, that's kind of a pain in the butt. And it's so much easier if you're taking darks, and your darks are the same, and you're trying to match your darks to your lights. You're not going to want to take a 5.6-minute exposure with your R filter, and then a 4-minute exposure with your G filter, and then a 4.3-minute exposure with your B filter. So what I'm going to say to do is pick a mid-value. Pick a round number that's a mid-value, and it's going to be good enough. And that's why, for me, when I'm shooting my exposures, my R, my B, and my G are all 5 minutes. That way my darks are 5 minutes. And it keeps it all simple. I'm not going to confuse my darks. It's just going to really make life a lot easier. And like I said earlier, as accurate as we get with these specs, that 5% read noise, you saw they had 9%. That's really just a rule of thumb. There's some theory that goes behind it, but for argument's sake, you know, we say swamp the read noise with sky background, and swamping is good enough for me. Whether it's 5%, 20 times, or 15 times, or 25 times, you're in the neighborhood, and you're good enough. So that is the initial. I say initial. I see that took 25 minutes. Wow. That is how you determine your proper exposure with the CCD.
Yeah, Adam.
Go
I'll
ahead,
add
David.
I'll add that there's a script in PixInsight for doing calculated sky limited exposures as well.
Oh, there is. Okay. There's all sorts of stuff in PixInsight. Let me just, you know what? I'm going to close a window that's irrelevant to me right now. And I am going, oops, click the wrong thing. Oh, geez, media player. That opens up a million windows. Yeah, so in PixInsight, let's see, basic, right? Basic CCD, is that what it's called? Where is it? Is it in image
It's
analysis?
under, I think it's under instrumentation.
Instrumentation. Geez, these PI guys and their jargon. Basic CCD parameters is where you would go to determine whether your CCD is performing to spec, below spec, above spec. And basically what it asks you for is a flat frame, a bias frame, and a dark frame. Actually, two of each. As was explained to me earlier, the bias frame, it takes two bias frames to determine the standard deviation of your bias value, which gives you that spec'd read noise. And I believe spec'd in RMS, which I don't remember off the top of my head whether it reads this out, readout noise as in standard deviation or RMS in this wizard.
It just shows electrons and ADU. You know, whenever you're putting these into another program, you need to make sure, you know, you're matching which one it's requesting, right? So if it's requesting readout noise and electrons, it'll probably drop the RMS. Most people don't say, you know, electrons RMS. It'll just ask for electrons. So use the electrons one. I don't know of any that use ADU, but if you come across one that does, then make sure you give it the ADU version.
Right. And your let me see if I get this straight. Your ADU times your CCD gain equals the number of electrons. So that is the basic way to see, in a sense, to count photons. So yeah, you put in your two bias frames, you put in your dark frames of differing exposures, and you click report, and it'll run through it, and it'll tell you basically the specs of your camera. So that is one cool script in PI. Adam? Something that was brought up earlier is, yes.
Adam, this is Alex. Hey, I wanted to just make a comment that particularly with the CCD calculator in Starizona and CCDware and in various other places, it's important, but there are a whole lot of other things to factor in. The concept behind the calculators in CCDware and Starizona is that you want your signal to swamp out your read noise. Okay, and so you set a value for when it's acceptable, and that's as much read noise and your signal is way over that, and that's where you get that 5% number. But there are other things you may wish to consider. One thing that may limit your length of your exposure is that you got a poopy mount and it can't go as long as it should be. You should do several things for that. One is go out and spend lots of money on a new mount or fix the one you got. But that may be the limiting factor, that if it says you should be taking 8 minutes to limit sky fog, that's fine. But if 8-minute shots are giving you trailed stars, you're going to have to cut it down to 3 minutes so that you can guide for that long. Or if you're taking pictures of some objects like the double cluster, the background noise, while it's always important to cut down the background noise, you also want star color. And it could be that the ideal exposure for swamping the background noise actually drowns out your stars, and so you lose a lot of star color along the way. And as who is it that's over here? Glenn? No, Greg. As Greg points out, he's happy with 5 minutes on his, I think it's a DSLR, I can't tell for sure, but he's learned from experience that that gives him the ideal. So he's able to standardize. It may be that on one night or another, you would get a different reading for the background sky glow, and therefore you would tend to maybe use a different exposure for your ideal exposure for that particular night. Well, maybe you don't want to do that because you've got a set of darks and a set of everything else all set up for standard 5-minute exposures. I can tell you when I go out to GMARS, the sky is pretty much the same every night I go out there, because I never go out there on a moony night. I always go out there on a dark sky night, and the sky glow is going to be about the same from one night to the next. So I'm always going to be taking 8 or 10 minute exposures on my L's, so it's all pretty standard. So there's, as Dave points out, that trial and error, he's found out that, that's what's good for him, and that's what he uses. The CCD calculators that are in CCDware and in various other places are very good for swamping the read noise, but there are other factors you may want to be considering when setting the ideal exposure.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think you may have hit this already, and I missed it, Alex, but if you're doing like the Orion Nebula or something, and it's going to be completely, overexposed at 5 minutes, then don't take a 5-minute exposure. You need to take something shorter, and you may also get into the realm of doing multiple exposure links and HDRing those things together and that sort of thing, right? So it's not one size fits all, right?
Right. And when you're checking that background sky glow, make sure you're getting the background. If you're in the Orion Nebula, it's really hard to find any background in there. Almost everything's got some nebulosity in it.
Yep. Very good points. Yeah. If you, and these are just, like I said, just rule of thumbs. If you have a bright star in your image and it's blowing it out and it's blowing out a large portion of it, you're going to probably choose to cut back on that exposure. So, rules of thumbs. I think the theory is to reveal the dimmest nebulosity of the galaxy, or separate the dimmest nebulosity of the galaxy that you can. But that's if your goal is only to reveal that. And sometimes blowing out the stars is, or not blowing out the stars is more important than revealing that dimmest nebulosity. So there are a lot of factors. I will never say trial and error is unimportant. Just go by theory. Reality has a way of kicking theory in the butt sometimes. So we should always do it that way. How many exposures? And I'm going to toss this out to the room, because this is something that I'm not even certain of myself, because I have a rule of thumb that I use for my narrowband, and it does not apply so much to RGB. So I'm going to throw this out to the room. How many exposures do you guys take, or how much overall time do you guys like to get on an object? Do you have a rule of thumb? What parameters do you guys use?
I think that's pretty easy. You get as many as you can.
Yep. Yeah. And you get at least, if you're using PixInsight, for instance, I always go for at least a dozen, because I want to get more than 8 so I can use Windsorized Sigma clipping. And by the time I've thrown out 1 or 2, like I said, I always shoot from I set up my sequences to get a dozen of each. So.
All right, so let me play devil's advocate for both of your comments. Greg, I believe that was Greg. As many as you can, right? So let's say the target is in a good position for 4 or 5 months, and I can maybe get 80 hours worth of exposure on my RGB object. That I might hit the law of diminishing returns after 16 hours. And Alex,
you want me to go through my little scenario?
Yeah, let's hear from Eric.
Go ahead, Eric.
All right. how much is enough on these exposures? To begin with, you have to realize that the detail in most of your images comes from the HA and from the L image and an LRGB. So let's just think about how much L data do we actually collect, because that's where the detail is going to be. So as a practical matter, I'll take one night of L exposures. Let's say it's 6, 7, 8 hours, some of which I throw away. At the end of that, I process it. I do the subframe selector to come up with parameters. What's my SNR? How round are the stars, et cetera, et cetera. And I set that data aside. So one night is almost never enough. So I take a second night of luminosity. And then I'll sum 1 and 2. And I'll look at the improvement in the SNR, specifically roundness of the star and the other parameters in the subframe selector. And you'll see that if you have ideal conditions, you've probably doubled your SNR, which is good, which also says that there's really more detail that you can get out of this. So you take a third night, and now you start to see, depending on how good those nights are, the SNR won't increase maybe even 25%. But you can start to draw a curve where you can see that maybe after 3 or 4 nights, you have reached the point where you've got about as much signal to noise as you reasonably can. And that's your stopping point. Now, every night is not the same. So some nights may be crappy and you can almost throw them away. Other nights may be fantastic. But you use your subframe selector for the sum of all your data points to figure out when you've reached that point of diminishing returns and you've collected as much data as you need. As far as RGB, I collect as little data as possible in order to get a color image, because the L is laying over the top of it, and that's where your detail is. There's a little bit more to this. You want me to go on and how to get a better L image, or just leave it at that?
You can go on. We were discussing it earlier, so
So now you say, okay, I've got my L image. Well, you actually don't have your L image as far as my process is concerned. So what you do is you now run your drizzle integration. Without going into what drizzle integration is, basically if you go through the PixInsight process and you get your drizzle image, which is say 2x the size of your original stacked image, and you downsample it to 50%, you will find that you have a higher SNR than your original stacked image. So I always go through a drizzle integration once I get all this data that I want in a particular image. And you say, well, okay, that's your L image. Well, almost, but not quite. So the next thing you do is you crop your image. Let's say you have a galaxy and it's 50% of the field of view. So then you crop your image, let's say 50% of the field of view, making sure that you captured enough stars. And what you crop is your registration image, not your stacked image, because your stacked image has already been compromised by star registration. So once you get that cropped image, you then register all of your calibrated but not registered image in your processing to that cropped image. And then you go through the whole drizzle integration again, and you'll find that you'll have tighter stars. Whether you get higher SNR or not is really not relevant, but you get tighter stars, which means ultimately you'll get more detail in the galaxy. And then by a mosaic process, which is another thing in PixInsight, you can integrate that cropped image into the total drizzled downsampled image, and that's your L image that you use to make your LRGB image. That's how long you collect
awesome. One of these days we'll have you go into detail and more detail and kind of spell out exactly what your process is for that. But yeah,
it's a little hard to grasp, but there's going to be an article in that in the SRO newsletter, if anyone gets that, in which it's all described.
Could
okay. Yeah, and as go ahead.
Okay, I'd just like to interject that. You know, how many frames would you like to have? I'm answering my 12 is what I need for what I am happy with for PixInsight to really get into processing. But remember the rule that if you double the amount of exposures, you generally can cut your noise down to about a fourth. So that's fine. If you take one and then you take a second one, you've really cut down on your amount of noise. And it doesn't take much longer to take two than it does to take one. But taking four does take more time. Now, if you've gone to 12, how many do you have to get to cut that noise significantly again? You'd have to go to 24. Well, that may be a whole nother night of imaging. So yes, there are practical limits. When I'm doing narrowband out of my observatory in my backyard here, it doesn't matter to me. I've got just about every night of the month I can take pictures, and I'm asleep. I don't care whether it's out there taking pictures or not, as long as it's clear. However, when I have to go out to GMARS, I'm taking RGB, and I want to get a picture at least once a weekend. When I come home, I want to have enough data to process. And so I can't just let it run for, 30, 40, 50 exposures of luminance and stuff like that. So practically speaking, yeah, you have to answer those questions. Just what do you want? I would really strongly suggest that whoever you are, whatever you're doing, don't be one of those imagers that goes out there and tries to get 5 different objects in a night. One a night should do it. If you can do a good job with one, do it. Get as many exposures as you can. If you're using a one-shot color camera, maybe not, but otherwise, get as many exposures as you can in that night on that one target.
And the thing is, Alec, you really have to have a way to evaluate the quality of those images when you stack them up. And that's what the process I described is, and that's what the subframe selector really allows you to do. You may have a great night and you may have a crappy night, and you have to be able to analytically know the difference and decide whether you need to collect more data or whether that's enough.
Well, no, Eric, that if you've got the observatory out at SRO and you can just keep collecting data, but if you've had to haul your stuff out to the dark sky, and you're not going to get out to the dark sky again till 3 months from now, you may have to compromise. And
actually, I use the same process with my imaging on my back deck. So it's the same thing, except there I'm using HA as the standard for subframe selection rather than luminescence at the SRO. So it's the same process, whether it's narrowband here or whether it's LRGB or even narrowband out at the SRO. The process.
I think there's a lot of amateurs out there that don't have the luxury of just holding off until they get more and more and more. They eventually have to get something. They have to produce something.
I think it goes back to a little bit of what Alex said in regards to what you expect to get out of it. Eric, you are shooting, I'll come right out and say it, world-class images, and you want the best possible image, and you want to know that you've got basically as much noise out of the image as you can do without elongating your exposure times to maybe possibly unreasonable levels. So by watching those diminishing returns, by watching the noise and seeing how much you're improving it, that's the way you're going to determine it. For a beginner, they may not do that. A beginner may say, well, I've got 15 hours in on this. What's 30 hours going to give me? And they may be satisfied with that. So it does come back a little bit to what you really want to get out of it. And but at the same time, it's good for the beginner to know exactly what it takes to determine what more they can get out of it. Or
Adam, let me add one more comment. I started out here just doing narrowband image because that's all I could do. I couldn't do LRGB because I had gradients that were terrible. And I started looking at some of the people that I respected, like JP's, Metziano, or however you pronounce his name. And I was looking at how many hours that he put into that. And I remember looking, he said, put 35 hours in an image. And I said to myself, that's crazy. Until I realized that that's what it took to get those images. And that's when I started piling up data. Even here on my deck, 20 miles from Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends. You're right. It depends on what you want to get out of your image, whether you just want to get the image or whether you want to get those images that you really admire.
Yep. And as Alex says, are you trying to impress your church group, or are you trying to win an APOD? And
I'm just trying to make a pretty picture. That's the end of. If I get a pretty picture, I am happy.
Yeah. And all right, I'm gonna try and move us along here because I see we've taken up 45 minutes only on one of the topics, but I think we've kind of covered that one well. And I'm gonna switch the order of my topics here because this was the second one of the second questions that I was asked. Should I be using Backyard EOS or Backyard Nikon, or should I be using Sequence Generator Pro? And from a beginner standpoint, and the only reason I'm not including other programs in this is because I have no experience with the other programs, and I cannot speak with any authority on anything besides these two programs. So I will tell you this. Anytime a beginner comes up to me and asks me what they want to buy a telescope, they want to start doing astrophotography, I have basically the same suggestion. Get yourself a DSLR, buy Backyard EOS or Backyard Nikon, or if you have your DSLR, whatever it may be, buy the appropriate Backyard for it and start shooting away. Backyard EOS has just an extremely intuitive and simple user interface that lets you hit the ground running. You're going to hook your camera up to your telescope. You're going to get yourself in focus. And the first night, you're going to be taking images. After you do that for a while, you may want to expand what that program can do for you. And for me, that's where Sequence Generator Pro came in. Sequence Generator Pro does more than just trigger your exposures. Sequence Generator Pro does basically almost complete automation. And I'm just, what I do want to show you first is I'm going to share my full screen. And because I don't have Backyard EOS installed on my laptop, I'm going to show you a Google image of Backyard EOS. And the core to Backyard EOS is this capture plan center here, where you are plugging in your frame type, your target name, what filter you may be using, and the exposures. So this basically triggers your exposures. You could set it to take 50 exposures at 300 seconds. Click start, and it's going to start away, and it's not going to stop until it's done. It does have some more advanced features like plate solving, but it's simple. You can hit the ground running. You can start taking images the first night you're out there. Focusing is very easy on it. You can do planetary if you choose. There's a drift alignment feature. It is basically a simple way to operate your DSLR if you're not really looking for that full automation suite. What Sequence Generator Pro is a full automation suite. And I am going to pull up Sequence Generator Pro and show you here. And the user interface of Sequence Generator Pro that you basically have to concern yourself with is down here. This is where you trigger your exposures. But where we expand upon that is Sequence Generator Pro will let you pick different targets and will automatically slew between the targets. And it'll automatically switch between your filters. And it will automatically focus. But each one of those features requires a setup. And that setup is done in your equipment profile manager, and you have to know a bit about your setup before you go. For example, your camera, this might not be the most complex if you're using a DSLR. There's only going to be a few factors you're going to have to plug in here. But with focus, you're going to have to figure some of this stuff out. With telescope, you're going to have to get your mount hooked up. It's going to have to know which mount it is. You're going to have ASCOM installed. With plate solving, you're going to have to give it a little bit more information. It controls auto guiding as well. But I will say this, it's going to take you a week, 2 weeks, maybe even a month to get the full automation suite working. You're not going to hit the ground running with Sequence Generator Pro. What you're going to do is you're going to spend a month or so simplifying the process so that eventually you can get that one-click run. And then when you finally get it set up and all working, all you do at the beginning of the session is click right there. It'll normally say Start Sequence. You click it. It's going to start triggering them. It's going to rotate through them. When it's done with that, it's going to automatically slew to the next. It's going to plate solve. So you can see multiple targets at the expense of some nose to the grindstone initial configuration. That's why, for a beginner, I think the simplicity of backyard EOS is going to be the way it is. At the same time, a beginner isn't normally thinking, you know what I want to do? I want to start doing astrophotography, but I don't want to have to touch my telescope. I just want to be able to go to sleep. You don't really think about it that way. After you start doing it a bunch of times, you start to say, you know, I really like processing, but I don't like sitting with my telescope for hours on end every night, breaking down at the end of the night. So depending on where you are in your astrophotography, one of those two packages is going to be really good for you. But when a beginner comes along, I suggest Backyard EOS. When they've gotten to the point where they really want to simplify the process, that's when I say, well, maybe you want to consider moving on to Sequence Generator Pro. And because I am quickly coming up on the hour where I try not to go over, I'm going to jump to the next topic that I had in mind, which is, should I start with PixInsight, or should I start, here's PixInsight, or should I start with Photoshop? PixInsight is, and I'm sorry for my dog barking, he's a pain in the butt. PixInsight is basically a full imaging suite. It is a bit complex, and that's why I'm showing off the suite right now. Of course, we start with stacking, and for a beginner, your stacking can be done with a script, batch pre-processing script. You basically just drop your bias, your darks, your flats, and your lights all in here. You click a registration image, you click your output directory, and with a few other settings that you may or may not decide to go into, you click run, you wait 20 minutes, and it's going to spit out your images. That is only your pre-processing. After that, you actually have to post-process your image, which involves taking those outputs and making them pretty. And PixInsight has a whole suite of processes that you can use, from gradient removal to noise reduction to combining your channels to ways to enhance the dynamic range so that you can see more of the range without portions of it being blown out. But it's fairly technical. It is unintuitive. You almost need a set of instructions to get you through it. And when I started using PixInsight, there weren't that many people offering instructions. But as some of you may have seen last week, Warren Keller has IP4AP, which is a website. He also has a book inside PixInsight. And whether you prefer to watch video tutorials or read books to learn how to use this, both resources make it a lot easier for me to say you may be able to start with PixInsight. Even though it's complex, if you do not already have Photoshop, PixInsight may be a good start for you. Now, if you already have Photoshop, and you've already used Photoshop, Photoshop has some other interesting ways to do it. Your channel combination is mostly going to be done in channels, but it also offers you layers. Your noise reduction is going to be done possibly through filters, or also through some actions which you can download. It's a different way of looking at it. A lot of people, I'm not sure whether a lot of people prefer Photoshop because they've used Photoshop, or Photoshop makes you think more in an image-centric way, where PixInsight has you thinking more of the algorithm. But either one, there are various resources online in video form and text form where you can take a walkthrough. I'm going to say you're going to do the walkthroughs over and over and over again until eventually you start figuring out what they're telling you, and eventually you're going to come up with your own concepts. You're going to be able to conceptualize what they're trying to tell you to do, and you're going to be able to use different tools within each to get your to prettify your picture, as I'll say. The big problem with Photoshop, well, I shouldn't say the big problem with Photoshop. The issue with Photoshop is it does not offer pre-processing. So you're going to need another program to pre-process, to stack, to calibrate your images. And for that, when I was using Photoshop, I was using Deep Sky Stacker. Deep Sky Stacker is free. It's very simple. You basically open your darks, your flats, your bias, and insert your light frames, and then you stack your pictures, and it spits those outputs out for you so you can bring them right into Photoshop and start working on them. I'm not going to get too far into that, but basically, excuse me, basically those are two good beginner options. There are other options, Star Tools for post-processing. CCDware has CCD Stack. I believe that's a CCDware program for stacking. But between the two, a few years back, I would have said Deep Sky Stacker Photoshop for beginners. These days, I think that there's enough resources with PixInsight that if you don't already have Photoshop, you could start with PixInsight. PixInsight, if it's still, I believe it's around $200. Photoshop has moved to a subscription program, so I believe it's $9.99 a month. So does that mean Photoshop is more expensive or less expensive than PixInsight? Well, I don't know. How many months are you going to use it? How many months are you planning on being into astrophotography? Hard to say. I hate subscription programs, but Photoshop's too valuable to not have, and eventually I bit the bullet and went with the full subscription. The last Photoshop I bought was CS4, and those were expensive.
Adam?
Yes.
Are you aware that you can get Photoshop CS2 for free?
I am aware of that, but I'm not sure it's legal.
Could I?
Oh, no, it is. It's totally legal.
It is not legal to use it unless you already have a license for CS2. Okay. Yes, you can download it, but it says right there that you're not supposed to. And it was put out there so that Adobe would no longer have to maintain it and keep supplying it to people. And they say right there that you can't buy it or you can't download it unless you already have a license. So no, you can't get a legal copy of it that way. Yeah, you can get a copy of it, but you can't get a legal copy of it.
Yeah, there's this discussion has come up. I mean, let your
Neil, let me. we aren't going to put the Astro Imaging channel in any position where we say, yeah, it's not legal, but you can go ahead and do it. So let's not go there. Okay?
Yeah.
We just
and the other thing I'll say is, even though Adobe's a huge company, think about you buy a copy, they're gonna make it better. You're gonna have support. It used to be, I mean, it used to be the case that you could go onto any site and download a copy of basically whatever you want, and in some cases get a virus. I know now that Photoshop or Adobe has put Photoshop on their own website where it seems a little bit more secure. It's safer, but I still do think, yeah, their position is it's only for people with a license. Now that said, we may have some students out there. Check with your computer department, because a lot of times you can actually get a student copy for free. When I was at Penn State, they offered Photoshop and Microsoft Office for free. And I remember walking in there for Microsoft Office, and they said, well, do you want Photoshop too? And I said, I can get Photoshop for free? Really? And it kind of shocked me, and I was jumping up and down. I was so happy. And they did it for a reason, because that was, what, 20 years ago? And ever since then, I haven't been able to give up Photoshop. And I still, to this day, am an Adobe Photoshop customer. As much as I hate some of Adobe's other products, Photoshop really is the best thing they've got out there. And I guess for that reason, I don't mind paying them $9.99 every month. Well, I shouldn't say that. My business pays them $9.99 every month because I use it for work too. But I primarily use it for work, and astrophotography, you know, that's a side hobby, but whichever way that goes. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm just quickly, well, let me take my mic back so you don't see the infinite screens there. Quickly reading through these because I heard a bunch of blips and I want to make sure that there were no questions. I am quickly looking for question marks. I don't see many question marks. Does anyone in the room, while I read through some of these, have anything to add to anything I said, or any insights or comments? Go right ahead while I work my way down this list.
Well, Adam, let me just reinforce what you said. For pre-processing, initial stacking, noise reduction, smoothing, I think PixInsight is the way to go. But I agree, I'm addicted. 25 years of Photoshop. I can't get away from finishing the image out in Photoshop. I think only David can do that.
I will say that whereas I used to jump back and forth from Photoshop, basically it was PixInsight for pre-processing. I run DBE, Dynamic Background Extraction, which is your gradient removal software. After DBE, I at first would bring it to Photoshop to stretch it, but I got more comfortable stretching it in PixInsight. So as I continued my proficiency with PixInsight, I went to histogram transformation in PixInsight. Then I would use my some of the dynamic range enhancement tools in PixInsight, and I am now at the point where almost all of what I do is in PixInsight. But when all is said and done, or when I think all is said and done, I do bring it into Photoshop, and I bring it into curves, and I go up and down and up and down, and I play around with the curves because I find curves in Photoshop to be a lot more intuitive than PixInsight, and I usually end up eking out a little bit more. When I struggle with noise reduction in PixInsight, I'll occasionally bring it into Photoshop. Sometimes I'll bring a noise-reduced image from PixInsight and my non-noise-reduced image from PixInsight and send them to Photoshop and do a blend of the two. So it gets treated as a tool. You know, sometimes sometimes the tools in PixInsight they're all great, but sometimes I just need to try something in Photoshop to see if I can get more out of it. I see a question on calibrated monitors, and I'm not the one to speak to that because I have an uncalibrated monitor. But one of these days, I think we had a session on monitor calibration a while back. I think we did, but that's a good topic for possibly another show. Someone finally uninstalled CC Creative Commons, which is the Photoshop installer program, last week. And I'll tell you, that's the thing I hate about the new version of Photoshop. I've had bugs with Creative Commons, and sometimes it crashes. I don't know. CS4 was completely bug-free for me, and the new version of Photoshop I've had a few bugs with. It slows down my computer a bit. It requires that installer program, but at the same time, it might not have Creative Commons. Yes, but yeah, so that's that. I've never used MaximDL, so I can't speak to that at all. I had thought of getting it a few times because CCD Inspector wants to use it, but I think I found a workaround for that. But yeah.
Adam, this is Greg. I use MaximDL still, and it's very good for stacking and calibration. I still use it for that one, even with SGP for capture, and I still use Photoshop for post-processing. I would like to get away from using Maxim, but it really does the job so well.
And in this hobby, sometimes there are tools that you know will do something better, but you're not quite comfortable with it. And if you're not quite comfortable with it, you're probably not getting the results out of it that it's capable of. So in some cases, being comfortable in a tool is more important than having the best tool. And yes.
There's a question that's been persisting for a while here. You said that you know that you have to subtract 1,000 from your 2,500 of your sky background a while back. Remember, a long time ago when we were young? Okay.
Yes.
And how'd you get your 1,000? Sean wants to know that. I think he's asked it a couple of times here. Hasn't gotten a good answer on that one yet.
Okay. So how did I learn that it was 1,000? When I first got my camera, I was shooting bias frames, and my bias frames were almost all in the 1,054 range. And I thought, well, that's odd. I would expect my bias frames to be 54, 0054. But, it was odd enough that I called up SBIG. And I said, can I ask you a question? Why are my bias frames 1,054? And I forget who the software guy at SBIG was, but he said, oh, we introduced a pedestal of 1,000. If you're using this firmware, we introduced a pedestal of 1,000. If you're using a prior firmware, the bias used to be 300. The pedestal used to be 300. But if you're using the firmware that I happen to be using, he just confirmed to me that it was 1,000. And that's how I knew. Now, if you shoot a bias frame with your camera, and all cameras are going to have a different pedestal, you're going to get a good idea as to what that pedestal is. Some of them may be like 300, for example, but when you do Well, Sean, what is your ADU value of your bias? Do you know your mean ADU? Because you'll get a really good idea as to what it is just by looking at that ADU and kind of 5 electrons. Well, that's your read noise.
Yeah, hey, Adam, just to
Yes.
mention, if you're really lazy like I am, my 583 wants a background sky of 1350, and my ST7 from the olden days wanted a 750 background sky, and just know that you got to get to that figure, and if you're below that, you got to increase your exposure to get there. So there is a lot of seat of the pants experience knowing that that's what you have to do. Now, the way I got the seat of the pants was to have experience doing it formally according to the calculator. But I realized after a while that the calculator always wanted me to get that number to 750.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, your QSI 583, right? So do you know what pedestal QSI used in that camera?
Not offhand, not now. I mean, I knew at one time. It's kind of like one of those, there's an awful lot of things we do that once we get them set up, we forgot how we got them set up. Yep. And I know to get to 1350 with my 583.
Yeah, it never hurts to call your camera company and just ask a million questions. Yeah. So Sean, what we want to know is the median of your bias frame. The read noise is going to be on top of that median. So it'd take a little bit of backwards math to do it. You just have to work your way backwards, and you get a good idea. It says 0.260. That I'm not quite sure I understand that. It should be in 0.260. I don't know what value that could represent, but
ADU, if you have a 16-bit camera, it's going to range from 0 to 65535, right? If you have a 14-bit DSLR, it'll be less, or a 8-bit, planetary camera will be 0 to 256, right? So, that's probably gain,
yes.
And then the electron readout is probably read noise. What you really need to do is actually just look at a bias frame and get what the average data values are, right? That's going to be pretty close to what your pedestal is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your pedestal plus your read noise.
And that RON probably means readout noise is probably what that stands for.
Yep.
Hey, Adam.
Yeah.
Can I take time? Neil is commenting on back to the Photoshop thing. He said that the Photoshop downloading CS2 was not legal, and I made sure that everybody understood that that we were not going to be advocating anything illegal here. I didn't mean to say that Neil himself was, and if it came off like that, I'm sorry about that. Now, Neil has explained himself over in the comments, but it should be noted that the comments do not necessarily survive in the YouTube tape. So I want everybody to know that Neil never advocated downloading the CS2. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that that was clear here. Okay.
And I'll also say it's a bit confusing because I hear people say that all the time about CS2, and
Windows 10. There was a big discussion on Windows 10 on cloudy nights just the other day, and no, it's not legal to just download it. You have to have a license. So,
yep. Although if you use any certain I think if you use the accessibility features in Windows 10, it is legal to download if you have a prior version of Windows. don't ask me why I know that, and don't ask me the legal ramifications of that one way or the other.
Yeah, at any rate,
But at any rate, yes.
I didn't want anybody on the tape later or on the YouTube thinking Neil said something he didn't say.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so Sean's saying, just so you know, it's 500 ADU. So if that's your bias pedestal, then the bias goes on. Well, I would expect it to be an odd number, or not an odd number, but the pedestal would be something like 500. Then the read noise would be on top of that. Read noise of 5.1 RMS. I don't know, working backwards to try and figure out what it is on top of that. But either way, all CCDs have a pedestal. Read noise is on top of that, and then the dark current accumulates on top of that, scaled by time and by temperature.
Just for clarification, Adam, there's a pedestal, which is typically a digitally added value to the data. There's a bias offset, right, which is typically a voltage introduced in the circuitry. The Sony sensor he has is probably a voltage offset, right? It's probably not a pedestal specifically. It's probably not a digital adder later on. So they're raising the voltage level during the readout to help with the readout and clean up noise, right, is what's happening. Now, some of the cameras like yours, I think, has an actual, may have an actual pedestal offset, right, but not all of them do.
Okay. Good to know that.
Just in terms of terminology, pedestal typically refers to a digital offset.
Gotcha. All right, well, thank you. We have gone a bit longer than I was planning on going, and of course my dog has to go out. And sorry about his barking, geez. Yeah, so thank you all for coming. I hope you got something out of this show. We did go deep into a lot of kind of beginner stuff, but then I think we took it a little bit more advanced. So hopefully it was a good discussion for all. Yeah, this monitor calibration is a popular topic. We might have to do something on that quick before long. Next week's show, I don't have anything scheduled yet. I may try and go over some of my interviews from Neath, so you'll get to hear directly from some of the vendors. And unless someone out there says I have a great idea for a topic and I'm ready to present it next week, schedule me and we'll get you on. But if not, plan on hearing some stuff about Neath next week. And I'm going to be hunting down more people. We're always looking for people to present, no matter what it is, no matter what your expertise or non-expertise, even if it's just something you like talking about, we'd be glad to hear it. The Knights Who Say Neath. And on that, I'm going to say goodnight. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next week. Clear skies to all of you, hopefully clearer than mine. Good night, guys.